Welcome to Let's Go Live. I am Gigi Meyer and I have with me award-winning psychological thriller author and filmmaker, Eric Magun. Welcome, Eric. I'm so happy to have you.
Good job on the last name. I appreciate that.
I, I practiced.
Yeah, good. You know what?
Oh, where'd he go? Somehow we lost him. Maybe it's just an internet issue and he'll be back. Let's see if I can invite him back because sometimes IG does its own thing, this platform. Okay, let's try this again.
It's not going off my phone.
Okay, I got you. I don't know where you went, but you're back.
Yeah, something's a little bit wonky here. Give me a moment. Okay. Well, it might pop off again. I don't know. It still says go live with the author, but I'm good.
I see you and I hear you, so we're
Okay.
good. Yeah.
Excellent.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, we have a lot to uncover because let me just start with this, make it official, this intro right here. Your book, Thank God for the Sinners, a dark, gritty psychological thriller, which I already mentioned, has won the 2025 top literary honors, including the New York Book Festival, the New York Big Book Award, and the International Impact Book Award for Best Horror Dash Psychological Thriller. So let's just start there with a big fat congratulations because, wow, triple award winner.
Actually, I'm a quadruple award winner since you got that last message. Yeah, I
Okay,
just
Eric.
took on another book contest win, which is very exciting, and never thought that that would happen.
Well, pat on the back to you because that is very impressive. And it's your
Mm.
debut novel. What?
Yeah, I know. I can't believe it myself.
Well, let's get into it. So I want to kind of break this up into three because I feel like you have lived three different lives. You have your, oh, hello, for those that are joining.
Hello.
You have your novelist, you have your
Hmm.
filmmaking, and then you're also like a regular guy that was in corporate and over in China and
Yeah,
South. Yeah. So let's
yeah.
talk about the book first, and then we'll dig all through everything else.
Okay.
So, Thank God for the sinners. What made you write that? Or actually, don't answer that. Give us a little synopsis of what the book is about. No spoilers, please.
Yeah, I know. My book, and like you said, mentioned before, is a dark and gritty psychological thriller. It dives deep into the fractured mind of my main character, Rick Price. He's a tormented sociopath. He's living a double life as as a covert agent in China, and all on the while the guise of a high-profile international businessman. Well, this very complex character, things turn south when a massage girl dies in his hotel room. Well, my main character, Rick, spirals into madness, fighting to preserve his life, his sanity, and his innocence.
Very, very good. So, will this be one book, or could he continue on to where he's going to be a whole series?
Oh, this is definitely a series. I have it in mind. I'm already into my second book called Thank God for the Drugs, which is another Rick Price novel. It's always going to be Thank God for something. It's something strange.
Oh, and let's make them spicy. Sinners,
Yeah,
drugs.
exactly, exactly.
Okay, so what was the inspiration for you to actually write this book, though?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned before, I started my career doing screenplays and wrote a movie and directed a movie that got a lot of different awards for it. You know, it's a really independent feature film. Way back when I started, as life takes you to all different directions, I found myself into the corporate world, not one for much of a desk job, pretty creative guy. So I got a job. I do product development, so I create products and produce them overseas. So with this job, I had an opportunity to go over to China back in the early 90s. I stayed in China for about 30 years, back and forth, living there, working there, being back and forth here with my family, and trying to figure it all out. And it was the very beginning of China opening its doors. I went over there. I was young. I was dumb. I was full of, exploration and wanting to get things done. So, it kind of took me into a China that doesn't exist today. Today it's a superpower. We all read about it. We know there's electric cars, there's a middle class, there's all kinds of things going on, and now they're rivaling us. Well, when I was there, in the 90s, early 2000s, and so forth, but especially in the 90s and early 2000s, it was still a third world country, wanting to be a big boy. And so they were doing things really quick. I got involved with lots of people in business over there, setting up factories, and working real hard in kind of a place that was radically different from the U.S. It's radically different from what it is today. It was madness. It was like the wild, wild west. It was dangerous at times. It was frightening. You always were trying to preserve your life and your basic health at the same time, while you're trying to make a buck and living in a society with people that, didn't quite, take to the sort of American norms that we're used to. So everything was a challenge. Um, and I always thought to myself, Eric, you're doing this crazy work in this crazy country with these crazy people. And that's okay. But what if something really happened to you? What if you got into it and something bad happened? Like, what do you do if you're in a country where there's no justice? There's no justice. You don't, know who to turn to next. What would happen to you? And at the same time, if like this character, he's, fraught with, emotional instability, trauma in his life. He's hiding the fact that he's also a CIA covert operative, and now he's fighting for his life, and his innocence, all in this strange country back in a very strange time.
So, has this idea been with you since then?
You know what? Yes, this I started because I'm a writer at heart. I chronicle a lot of things, like a lot of our writers do. We look at life a little bit differently. We definitely look for things to write about, look for people that are interesting, look for stories that kind of spark our interest as well. And so, out of all the years, and all the turbulence and all the experiences, I just had so much written down that I wanted to express to everybody. I really wanted to preserve this time of life of kind of working overseas as an expat in a country like China before it was, a superpower, and all the craziness that kind of goes on with that kind of lifestyle and that kind of way to make a living. And so I wrote down just, a lot of crazy, crazy anecdotes, and, thought to myself, well, let's try to encapsulate this. Let's get people interested in a time period that will never happen again. And let's talk about, the good, bad, and the ugly, especially the ugly. And let's fictionalize it a little bit and dramatize it so that, it's super, super interesting. But really, wanted to make sure that I wrote it with an impetus that, people could read it and, you know, kind of understand a little bit about what's going on there. I really wanted to take them into the scenes, into the smells, into the sights, into all of this stuff that was just crazy back then. Hold no punches, hold nothing back, call it for what it was. And not try to, you make it like some kind of, incredible fantasy, but really make it sort of more real and challenging. And this character is very complex. He's fighting off a lot of different emotions and, his own mental instability and his own trauma through his life. And then just kind of put him in this ridiculous situation, where he's got a dead massage girl and and then what does he do? What does he do? How does he make those decisions? How does he come out of it? Does he come out of it? And what happens to him? And how does, his past trauma and his life in China and his, all the things that went on, how does that affect his decision-making ability? and trying to get through, through this very complex, incredible situation.
Oh, no, it sounds riveting. And obviously, if it's won already 4 awards, I know it's an excellent book. Is it in first person or third?
It's in first person. So I write it as Rick Price. And I give him a really talented voice, an incredible voice. You get to know him through a series of flashbacks from basically from his birth. So, you kind of know him from his birth, his early, childhood, his adolescence, his adulthood. I kind of take you on the whole entire life, but we dip from present day incredible experience to how the hell did he get there? Why is he there? What is he doing? What's this all about? And then we jump back into his life. We do that intersecting with, present day back tense into, what happened before. And so you kind of give the reader a chance to kind of understand and explore as the story goes on, this character, what he's been through, and then you kind of make sense as to where he's at now, and then you kind of go like, okay, I get this guy, I understand where he's coming from. How is he going to deal with all this?
So it sounds riveting though, because I like when it's first person present tense, or first person. Yeah, you feel like your back's against the wall and you're trying to be them. And I think it makes it for like a more richer, deeper story.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a rich, deep story. It's and written, through the eyes and the voice of my character, Rick Price. It's really nice to give him a voice, to give him sort of that, anti-hero that, he's not John Wick. He's not going to go out there and, do something fantastic that you go like, oh, that's just crazy. I really wanted to make him real. And I wanted to show you all his faults and all his skeletons, and then put him in an uncompromising situation and kind of figure out like, well, how does he do this? What does he go next? Now that we understand who he is.
Okay, one, we all love John Wick, even though it's completely
Yeah.
unreal. But no, I love that because it's you're taking just like a regular guy, and I mean, relatively speaking, he is a double agent. So just a regular guy with the limited resources, and he doesn't have the whole John Wick thing going for him. So I think that makes it so much more relatable for people reading it. Correct?
Correct. And he's had, as you find out, just this incredibly horrible, you know, unbelievable existence since his birth, and so there's so many different traumatic things that has happened to him that just affect him and his decision-making ability, and even though, he tries his hardest to sort of maintain his composure and maintain, the outside person of who he's trying to present to everybody else, inside he's completely falling apart.
So those are they flashbacks throughout?
The flashbacks throughout. So you go from present tense, insane situation to how did he get there? Oh, we're going to dive back, literally from birth. And we go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So by the end of the book, you kind of go like, okay, I get it now.
Like it all comes together. Well, it adds mystery, right? Because we all love to think we know what the motivation is. And so your readers are constantly like, oh, yeah, I see it coming. But then they may not, right? And so flashbacks, I love when people do this because then it's obviously two parallel stories being told at the same time, same character, obviously, but you don't know how it ties in together at the end, typically.
Yeah, and I really was trying to, and that's exactly the point. And I was trying to, to show that, here's this character, we're portraying him as kind of this hero, this anti-hero, but, he has a whole life behind him. There's just a lifetime of experiences and bad decisions and addictions and, wildness and things happening to him and trauma and abuse. And you kind of go like, you know what? Anybody reading this story they can relate to some parts of it,
Mm-hmm.
and say like, okay, so you wrote about a character who's the hero in your story, but he's just like everybody else. He's got skeletons in the closet. He's got a whole macabre of skulls in his closet. And try to make it as relatable as we could.
Well, and I think that there's a word for that, and I cannot remember what it is right now. But it's when people are relatively good and they're stuck in bad situations, and so we empathize with them because we know that that's exactly it. But you don't empathize with bad guys doing bad things. But there's a term for that. So it sounds similar to this guy, even though he's a double agent. Yeah, we know that that trauma obviously affects him.
It affects him like it affects everybody in life, and we all make decisions and we all go about life. And, our past really seems to at times just really interfere with our present,
100%.
and yeah, and this character was, he was damaged from birth. And so, I really wanted to ask the question of, to the reader of, you know, was he a sinner at birth, or did he become one from what happened to him? And really the big question or the big remark is we're all sinners. We've all done stuff. Nobody's perfect. Don't take yourself so seriously. Don't take life so seriously. We are imperfect people, trying to get by. And that's what this character's doing. He's dealing with all his imperfections and trying to deal with the stress of being a CIA double operative that he never really asked to be, trying to hide himself as this international businessman. He's got a family that dotes and loves him, but he's hiding so many skeletons, So at the end of the day, I'm like, who is he really?
Yeah. Jane in the comments says sometimes you can get the same flashback but slightly changed. Is there an essence of this in the story? Do the remembering back changes the character's development? That's a good question.
Yeah, from what I'm understanding in that question is yes, the character is completely, evolving from the experiences that he goes through. And all those experiences keep changing him as a person and keep changing the decisions that he makes. And why sometimes he doesn't make great decisions. You kind of understand why, and that makes him a little bit more relatable.
Well, going back to your comment about, are we born saints or sinners? And I think it's fascinating because what I always don't understand about humanity is like why we're born in the time and space we were born into the environment we're born in, right? So with women, it's a little bit better off if you're born in America than it is in, say, Afghanistan
Or China.
or China.
Hmm.
And, and so to me, that's fascinating because I think some people are already born into disadvantage and they have a greater mountain to overcome, which is really tragic.
It's tragic. I tried to explore that as well in this book. There's a lot written about, look, the fact in you're bringing up women in particular, but the fact in the mid '90s, early 2000s, what China used to be, there was a one-child rule. Women were definitely not looked upon. They were frowned upon. It was not uncommon to go to China and hear stories of, little baby girls being left on the side of the road, or just horrible, horrible stuff, and, I write about this and I write about the fact that, if you're a woman back then and you had some considerable looks about you, you can be a massage girl, you could work at a KTV, which is the karaoke TV, as for prostitutes and things like that, and you can make more money one night than any other woman can make working a month in a factory.
Oh,
You
wow.
know,
Yeah.
and you could potentially find a husband or something, but it's kind of like it was so unfair back then,
Yeah.
for women, and I tried to write about that in a way that, you know, um, kind of got that message through without being really preachy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're talking to I hate the word feminist because it has such negative connotations, but I have a huge women empowerment platform. So you're talking to the right girl about that. Oh, I don't know. He's frozen.
Am I frozen again?
Okay, there you are. You're back again.
Yes. Sorry.
So when you're writing these very difficult and
Mm.
traumatic subjects, what does that leave on you? What imprint does that leave? Or did the country already leave an imprint and this is almost healing or cathartic when you write these stories?
Um, It's a great question. Look, it's definitely cathartic to write because, I've been through so many and I've seen so many things. So it's great
Yeah.
to get it out, to fictionalize it, to put together this remarkable character. And I think it's, look, for me, writing has always been cathartic. It's always been a release. I've been writing like this since I was, in grade school. And it's been my outlet, and it for everything that goes on. And I
So,
don't, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
well, it sounds like though it's a way for you to process what's happening around you because you had said many when we started the interview, as an American, we're definitely outside looking in. And so it's a weird little paradigm because we don't understand some of the cultural things that they are going through. And so I'd imagine you've seen some really horrific things, but it's a way to contemplate, reflect, and process through.
Yeah, it is. And because where do you go with all those feelings? Where do you go with those emotions? Where do you go with the things that you saw, with the trouble that you've been in, with, the fact that, you have to be there for work, as well.
You're not getting exist in China for an American in the 90s.
Yeah, it was the wild, wild west. It was not for everybody. It was definitely difficult. It does get better as China advanced so quickly. So that was a really short period of time that had happened, but a really interesting time.
Oh, I'm sure. Jane wanted to know in the comments, do you keep a diary as well as your writing notes and ideas? And you had said that earlier that you write everything down. And so I'd imagine you probably do journal.
I journal. Yeah, I don't have necessarily a diary for diary's sake, but I journal.
Yeah.
When things hit me, I journal. Hey, look, I love watching people. I love hearing stories. I love to travel. And I've been to China and Southeast Asia for, I don't know, for over 30 years. So, I've seen things, and when I go and travel and I work, on my off time, I won't take the tourist route. I'll go to the dark and seedy places.
Immersion.
Yeah, I'll go to the places that you're not really supposed to walk through,
Oh,
or see or experience, because that's what life is for me. It's a giant experience. And sometimes to take off the safety of it, and kind of experience it for really what it is, try to understand the people for who they are. You put yourself into some pretty uncompromising situations sometimes.
well, it's, I would believe, the harshest side of humanity.
Yeah, there's a lot that I've seen that I just can't unsee. And there's a lot to write about with that as well. And there's a lot of great things too. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't all bad. I made some great friends. We made some great products. I was able to keep my family well fed. But there's always two sides to everything. And I really, for me, it's the other side. It's the dark side. It's the gritty side. It's the side that isn't often talked about, or portrayed, that really attracts me.
Yeah. Has there been uplifting things too? I want to get back to that question. But I know what you're saying because this the duality of life, as beautiful as it is, there is also ugliness and evil in the world. And so with your series, and you said you're already been to book two, and I want to talk about that in a moment. I would imagine your travels in 30 years, it's limitless, the storyline, the possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, it feels that way at times, it definitely does. And even still today, I'm still traveling. I'll be back in China again in about 2 weeks or so, because I still do a little dabble over there because it's part of what I've been doing my whole life.
Uh-huh.
And so, it just even, every opportunity to explore, to see, to write, to, just fill your mind with different experiences is just so super important, especially to this writing process.
So, yeah, to answer Jane's question, what are some of the uplifting things that you experienced 30 years in South Asia?
Well, I've been to some towns where they've never seen an American before, and,
Oh,
and that has been outrageous.
how
Just
were
to
you received?
well. Well, there's an old saying in China where the white people are generally perceived as what they call guelos, which is the white devil, right? That's how they portrayed us in the very beginning.
Oh
However, so Guelo gets thrown around a lot. Guelo, Guelo, Guelo. However, the towns and the cities that I've been to where they've seen few, or I was one of the only Americans, it was always so lovely. There was a point in my time in China where I would carry a bag of balloons in my backpack. And whenever we saw kids, because I get out of the car, we see kids and they come running over, they were super, inquisitive, we blow up balloons and give them balloons. And it was just like, it was so, to be able to do something like that, and also
no.
to be able to go out there and, and work with, factories that were just beginning. These are real people with lots of people working for them and lots of pressure, and to go over there and give them opportunities to make product that we can sell in America, and to be that sort of beacon for the US, overseas is really important, and it always felt good to do. And I make great friends there too. I mean, I've worked with some people there that I still, keep in touch with. I write about what this character Shushu in my book. Shushu means uncle in China. And so I had a shushu in China. I had an uncle that I worked with, who took
Oh,
care of me, who tried to move the needle along, so you say, who was there for me when times got tough, who was there to help ease through some of the craziness that went on. So, between the people, the sites, the children, there's just, and the hope, there's so much hope out there. Just that things are going to turn around. And so it's nice to have been for a while, that sort of beacon for hope.
well, two comments I have is that if you're the first American, you're almost an ambassador to goodness and what America can bring. And they're no different because those factories that you're bringing in or your, company is bringing in, we forget that everyone around the world is equal in the sense that we all have hopes and dreams. We want better for like our children and the generations after. That's universal.
Yeah, and when you go travel internationally, you don't forget that. It's always a situation where you are sort of the ambassador. I mean, there was so many times, and I write about this in my book extensively, of dinners, and meetings and opportunities where the local governments would just want to go out with you because you were American. Now, they weren't going out with you, by the way, because they wanted to, like, you know, rub your shoulders and, cheers and toast with you. They really wanted to outdrink you, outperform you, put you in difficult situations to see how you would react. There's a thing in China called saving face, and I write about that too. And saving face is kind of this principle that, you're not going to say no, you're not going to back down to any challenge. You're going to save face. Again, it's a real male, masculine, you know,
Competitive.
op competitive opportunity out there. And so, you come to these foreign places where they see Americans and they're so happy to, but at the same time, they really want to try to understand what you're made of. What's your resilience? What do you have inside of you? Can you keep up? Can you handle it?
That's so
And you
funny.
and you keep going to yourself like, I can do this because I'm the American. And they keep going, yeah. How about another shot? How about another shot? How about another?
Like some
And so
machismo going on.
there was quite a bit of that. Yes.
Another question. Have you developed close relationships with those factory workers? Who is Shushu based upon?
Yeah,
Perfect.
Shushu is he's still one of my best friends overseas. He's a factory owner that at one point in my life going over there, he owned a factory that was about the size of a town. So he was like a mayor of a town. He
Yeah.
had thousands of people working for him. Had unlimited, unyielding power, with the government, with customs officials, with policemen. There was a lot of things you had to do back in those days to grease the wheels, and to be the man back then, there
Right.
was just a lot of corruption, a lot of things that kind of went unsaid, a lot of, turning your eyes to something else so you didn't necessarily see it. Um, but that's how things were back then. It was all about the almighty dollar, and the Shushu, my character, had the power, almost as a king in this one town in China, and it was a remarkable thing to witness.
Oh, I'm sure. Because here in America, I mean, my gosh, we have so much regulation and laws. And so bribes are like an international commerce, right? But we're not allowed to do that here. Right, wrong, or
Right.
indifferent. But when you work in other countries, like in oil and gas or energy sector, yeah, in order to get things done, you know and so I'd imagine you as an American, we have just a different experience that we've grown up with, and then you go and watch this guy who basically owns a town and everyone in it, and you're just like, this is interesting how that works.
Interesting, and believe me, when you're there in China alone doing what I'm doing, it's good to be friends with those type of
Oh,
people.
I bet. Oh, for
I
sure,
think
because
the countless amount of times I was so sick that I thought I was going to die. I was so happy to be in his company, to be able to whisk me away to some dirty, rotten hospital to get some kind of shots that I didn't even think that were going to cure me, but might kill me.
may or
Um,
may not work.
may or may
Shoo
not
shoo.
work.
You're like, sit
Probably
right
wouldn't,
next to me,
but
shoo shoo.
but I had my shushu.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And I know that I have a couple friends that work for, well, these like semiconductors, these big AI
Yeah.
or scalers, and so obviously China has a ton of those factories, and he'll share stories with me, and it's advanced a lot, he said, but there's still a lot of resources that are lacking in these factory towns.
Yeah, I mean it's an amazing thing because China has come so far, and now there's so much sort of instability with trade with China and the tariffs and all this bullshit that keeps going on back and forth. That's kind of making it more difficult, if almost impossible, to deal with that country anymore. We literally, as Americans, spent the past 20, 30, 40 years building that country up to do exactly what it's doing for us: create cheap goods, that we would like, and can buy and can afford. And now we're turning around and saying, well, that's not working for us anymore, right? And so, it kind of puts everything into a very precarious situation, and takes people like me and, other people in these types of industries to now have to say, well, if we can't rely on China, we just spent 30 years building it up. We can't do that now. Where do we go next? And so, there's a whole other world of the rest of Southeast Asia that's, becoming just like China is. It's Vietnam and Indonesia and Malaysia, and so there's just this amazing time period that's happening now where things are just getting shifted to other countries, and people going in and exploring things. And so this thing that I witnessed in China is just happening over and over again in other countries right now.
We do have a very complex interdependent relationship.
Yeah, yeah, very complex. And it's look, I've seen both sides of it, right? Because I'm American. I've worked in China. I understand the Chinese people, good
Yep.
friends there. I've worked in Southeast Asia, and look, there's a symbiotic relationship between both countries, and I think, you know, at this point, I admire what China has done for their economy, for the people. They have a real gumption to want to get it done and do it at all costs. But I understand that, that there's logical reasons for, America and Americans to kind of now say, wow, that was really convenient when you were supplying us TVs really cheap. But now you have nuclear weapons, and super chips and AI, and, things are, you're not just producing for us anymore. You're now a competitor.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's trying to catch a runaway train. And I feel like we already had that when with the start of Aramco, if you know
Yeah.
the history of how we started with oil drilling in the Middle East,
Mm.
our partnership there. So it does get very complex to try to untangle that knot.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. And then, besides all the geopolitical stuff and the experiences in China. The other really big theme to the book is music, especially punk rock in my book. I have to just put it out there.
Yeah,
The
talk about that.
the 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 character Rick himself, kind of like myself. I grew up in New York in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and was very much part of the New York hardcore music scene, hardcore punk scene. And that was like family to me. That's where I belong. I was a misfit, and that was where I was accepted, and felt accepted. And that became a huge part of my life, and it's a huge part of this character's life. So, he's got this, tumultuous life. He's got this violence. He's into punk rock. He's this anti-hero, but the music itself, um, throughout the book, I really wanted to portray sort of, how the music, was a big part of this character's life. And, the way that I write is really frenetic. I write hard and tough. Before I write, I'm blasting my music, I'm assaulting my keyboard, I don't do anything in silence, and that kind of comes about, in the writing, in the personality. I'm really getting into the personality of the character, and to up the ante, I did something which I thought was really fun. All the 47, 50 chapters in the book, they're all an ode to a punk rock anthem. So, I have, every chapter title is a punk rock anthem, and that song means something to the chapter, it means something to what's going on, and then I kind of put all 47 chapters together on a Spotify playlist, and
I
gave the reader an opportunity to not only read along with the book, but to listen along, with some of the things that really kind of motivated me to write about.
Well, you love butthole surfers, and I died laughing when I read that.
Yeah, it's look, very funny name for a band, but a great band. I love, well, all punk and hardcore, but that particular band in question, that's how I warm up with the Buttholes. They're a very special band back in the day, that just did things their way, and did it to a degree that was never really saw before. And that freedom of expression, that ability to even take that name on as a group seriously, and go out there and create music that was so edgy that you literally would watch concerts there and be frightened because you didn't know what was going to happen next. And I always thought to myself, there's such a beauty in that. It's
Well,
amazing.
look at you, decades later, still talking about them. So that's their impact.
It's their impact. There's a movie coming out about them, called the Whole Truth and Nothing But the Truth, or something like that. So I'm very excited to see that.
So one of the questions is, Jane says, is he angry outside but wholesome inside then? So how does the music manifest in his story with him?
Yeah, I mean, it's questionable, and I made it kind of questionable throughout the story. I mean, look, he's got definite times of inner, emotional, sanctity where he's doing the right thing,
Yeah,
you know, but
good.
there's also many times where he's not doing the right thing, or he is thinking he might be doing the right thing. He's even conflicted about the choices he makes, because, he is a good person, but he's so mired with the past, and so conflicted in his brain that, it's questionable some of the things he does. Then they're understandable because you understand his background. But, I think on the whole and whole, he's tipped to being more of a good, innocent character that is just caught up with a very traumatic life, who's trying his best.
Does this book have content or trigger warnings?
Look, I don't, I mean, it's the first time I've really been asked something like that. If I think about it, look, there's a lot of, debauchery that goes on. There's a lot of, reference to drug use and, alcoholism and, depression and darkness. So, I would think in those terms, they possibly could be trigger warnings, um, for those types of people. But it's done in a spirit of saying, we're not alone. You're not alone. I'm writing about a character that, often isn't written about these things, who's struggling, to kind of make the reader understand that, not all heroes are perfect. And we all could be a hero at the same time that we could be a sinner.
Oh, we all say not all heroes wear capes, but the reason why I ask about trigger and content warnings is uh, some readers just absolutely love them. And the more you disclose how many there are, they're like, yes, this is for me.
Yeah. So in that case, there's trigger warnings.
You're like, there's all of them.
Yeah, no, look, the book holds no punches, as I said before. I lay this character out, flaws and all, for his greatness, for his goodness, for his badness, for his upbringing, and just want to put him in a situation that kind of makes you kind of wonder, what does any one of us do when we're in these uncompromising situations,
Well,
and what do we fall back on?
mhm.
How do we make the right choice? Do we make the right choice? What is the right choice? When your life's on the line or your innocence is on the line or your family's on the line, and just really kind of explore that.
We love it. We love when we don't know what, okay, let me even take a half step back. Nobody wants to experience that in real life. But we love it when we can step into the shoes of a character and experience that because it really does. Some of these books stay with you long after the chapter is closed or the book is closed because you're like, what would I do?
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that. I mean, that's exactly what I wanted to happen with this book. That's some of the great feedback I've gotten from this book from the people that read it and some of the reviewers, that the book really stays with you for a real long period of time. And as a matter of fact, at the end of this book, I also wrote the first chapter, Thank God for the Drugs, so
Mhm.
that, I would give the reader kind of this teaser as to like, but wait, there's more.
Here we go again.
Here we go again. Same character, crazy situation, but a different one. Whereas, and thank God for the Sinners, the Rick Price character takes place mainly in China and then flashes back to his life in New York.
Mhm.
Thank God for the Drugs will take him on a U.S. cross-country tour. So we're moving him out of China and bringing him across to the U.S. for Thank God for the Drugs, and it's going to be equally as compelling and a lot of fun to read.
How long does it take you to write? You already have the first book out. So, how long was that? And the second book, how long do you estimate it'll take you to write that one?
Well, okay, the first one was definitely a 5-year endeavor. All right,
We
so
can't
it's
do
like,
that. No.
yeah, but that's because we have real jobs too that we have to do in life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, we're writing, as you know, it's, real difficult to not set aside the time to get it done. You have to do that, and if you don't have the time for whatever reason, it's hard to make that time happen, especially when you need to like kind of lose your mind to find yourself again, in your writing. And so, it really took, 5 years, but it took really the last 12 months of full time, no more, executive world. I'm doing this. I'm getting it done. I'm finishing it. But it's a complex story, and it did take some time to sort of figure out how each chapter is going to intertwine with each other. Doing constant flashbacks. I don't want to lose the reader, at the same time, so I got to be really cognizant of that. So it's complex, and then finding music that fits the chapter, putting it into a playlist. Just there's so much thought that went into writing this book, and I'll have the same amount of thought in all the other books that I write. And so, to answer your question, I'm not sure how long it's going to take. Hopefully not as long as the first one, but it appears to be going quicker now. Uh, but that's because I have the time to do that.
Well, and that's true, right? Like it's complicated getting everything right. And sometimes when I'd imagine you're writing the flashback, you're thinking like, where am I at in the flashback timeline or plot line compared to my regular story, too? Because you're telling two stories at the same time.
Yeah, and it has to make sense. Like that's exactly the point, because something will happen real time that has to connect with what happened in the past.
Correct.
And then you go back to a different time in real time, different time in real time. And so everything's got to kind of make sense
Sure,
without
you have
losing
to
the
have a
character.
theme. You have a theme
Yes,
overall, you have a theme per chapter to be able to do the flashback, then you have a theme with the music. It's a lot.
it's a lot to juggle, but that's how my brain works. There's always, an unlimited amount of information being dumped between these two ears that has to get processed somehow.
Well, and Jane in the comments says you have a full character arc now already because you've done the flashback. So when you're writing the second book, do you find it to be easier because you already had laid the foundation?
Good, great question. And the answer is yes and no. Yes, definitely because the foundation is already there. People know what they're going to kind of expect from the character now. They understand the flashbacks. But now to put him in a different situation in a different country and then have that different situation and that those kinds of different experiences still relate to his past, still come up with more things that happen to kind of explain where he's at. Um, it's becoming a little bit challenging, because I think the great thing about the book that I just wrote is that none of it's forced. You kind of get it, and it all kind of works. And so you're having to do that for the second book, the third book, the fourth book. I can see where that might get challenging.
Are you going to include any flashbacks in the other
Yeah,
books?
yeah, everything's going to be sort of the same, just kind of like, oh, that's a crazy scenario. Oh, he made that decision. Oh, now I understand why he made that decision. Or, ooh, that was terrible in his life. How is that going to affect him in his current life? Um, and so, yeah, there will be that. There will be, look, I think the music will evolve from this sort of 70s to 80s kind of punk rock anthems, and we'll probably, put that more into the 90s and so forth. So, no, everything will kind of evolve but stay the same.
Oh, what a good word, though, that evolves.
Hmm.
How has your writing changed? When we write one book, we're learning about ourselves too as authors and writers. And, what do we write in first person, third person? Are we present tense, past tense? Are we a morning writer, a night writer? Do we have to have total silence? You said that you like jam out to punk rock, So much is that learning about ourselves. What have you made different for the second book?
I think for the second book, it's more of, okay, I understand how the first book came together and how things are supposed to work,
Yeah.
to make sense, so you kind of have that blueprint already, whereas the first book, my room is like a crime scene, you have, post-its everywhere, you got yarn string going from this one to that one to figure out, how did this get here to that,
Yeah.
and it's just this giant mystery,
Mhm.
uh, kind of unfolding as you're writing, but with the second one, you kind of have an opportunity to say, okay, that's how that works. So now it's okay to do that, and to really explore that and know that you, if it worked before, it could definitely work again. So stick to what already was working. If listening to loud music and throwing up post-its everywhere and, and getting yourself psyched up that way, if that's working for you, then keep that going.
Yeah, tell us
So
that process.
yeah, so in a way, it's a little bit easier because it worked the first time. It should hopefully work again this time.
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
So I want to take the last 10 minutes and talk about the filmmaking side because as creative as Rick Price is and this world you're creating, that started years ago in an homage to Homer and the Odyssey.
Yeah, that's correct, and that's an interesting story in itself. I was back early when I was much younger. I was really fortunate to be one of the first classes that got into De Niro's film school. It's now called the New York Film Academy. It was called
Yay!
Tribeca Film Academy back then. I sent in some crazy videos that I was doing when I was living in Seattle at one point, and and got accepted and was very excited to come back to New York and go to film school. And I met a film partner there from Italy. A great guy, hardly spoke any English. Um, you know, but the one thing we had in common, besides our love for music, was we both read Homer's The Odyssey.
Yeah.
Here we are, like two different parts of the world, reading this incredible masterpiece of a classic of an incredible tale. And that's one thing we had in common, and we thought to ourselves, like, you know what, if we could, almost in the spirit of like my book, Thank God for the Sinners, if we can rewrite this thing so that the main character, the Odysseus character, is more down to earth. Let's make him a drug dealer, you know, and let's make his wife,
More down
instead
to
of
earth is a
yeah,
drug dealer.
except yeah, let's make him a drug dealer, and instead of his wife being this, pristine character, let's make her, some kind of stripper getting stuck into the situation that she can't get out of because of her evil Johns that are holding her captive, and then let's set this whole thing in Seattle in 1994, just when grunge was breaking, just when music was going out of its mind in this
Yeah.
incredible city filled of actors and actresses and wannabes and musicians and drug addicts and colorful people and
Mhm.
artists. It was an amazing, again, another amazing time capsule of life going on. And we said, let's get in there and tell this incredible story, but let's bring it down to earth as possible. Let's make all the gods and goddesses, strippers and junkies and artists and things. And, let's just tell the people that, you know what, yeah, again, just like in my Thank God for the Sinners, there's everybody, is a god and goddess to some degree. It just depends if how you feel about yourself and what you can get done. And we really wanted to say, like, all these misfits running around Seattle in this incredible time period, let's put them to work. Let's feed them, beer and cigarettes and pizza, and let's get this incredible story off the ground. Let's tell it like it's never been told before. Again, it was the early '90s, so this whole genre of independent filmmaking was also right there. It was also happening. You can make a movie for just a little bit of money. You could steal every scene possible. You could, hire people for nothing and just not let anybody tell you no. You can't do that. Just have this crazy feeling that I'm going to get it done. Align yourself with people that are just as crazy, you know, and try to do something really special. And we did that. And look, the film was, I mean, it wasn't widely distributed or anything like that. Again, it was, more of a B midnight movie. We played a lot of different festivals at midnight. We won a whole bunch of festivals at midnight for this particular thing. But again, we made it for very little money, not very polished, but we did the best we could do with the means that we had, and had just a lot of fun and an incredible experience to do that.
Is it available anywhere at all online?
You know what? We're having a little bit of situational with our current distributor and the rights and all that stuff. I don't want to bore you with that crap, but we got thrown into one of those situations. But on the good news, the movie can be seen on YouTube. If you go to my website, ericmagun.com, which is my first and last name, EricMagun.com, I have a link to the YouTube site for the film. You can watch the trailer of the film. You can watch the whole film in its entirety.
Cool.
Um, yeah, and the film is called Toast with the Gods. So again, you can try to look it up on your own, but just go to my website, click the link, and enjoy it.
What did you learn from making that? What's the takeaway?
Huh. The takeaway is that um, that things are not impossible in life, and don't let something kind of, not everything's got to be perfect to make it work. You don't need to have the perfect cast, the perfect amount of money. Everything doesn't need to be set in place to do it. You just have to have a dream. You got to have a vision. You got to get the right people around you. And again, like, you just can't let no be the answer. You always have to find a way. You always got to stick to your conviction. I don't think I ever, in my film part, I don't think we ever said for a moment that we couldn't get it done. It was more of a question of how fast could we get it done. you know, um,
Was it the Italian gent who could not speak English that was your film partner?
yeah, I mean, he speaks great English. Not well. He sounds like Count Dracula when he talks, but but yes, no, we both had this common feeling that we can do anything at this point, and let's not let anybody tell us no. Again, we could have, with the little bit of money that we raised, We could have done like any other independent filmmaker, made a small movie about like two clerks working in a convenience store and kept the budget real low and kept everything real simple. But instead, we decided to redo the greatest story ever told on Earth. And that just goes for, I guess, just sort of the gumption that we had to do whatever we could do to not let anything hold us back.
Well, the bravado, right? Because he's in a different country, doesn't speak the language, and then you gave him the opportunity, and you're like, yeah, let's go, let's do this. And so much of our life we spend holding ourselves back. Our biggest prison is our mind.
I agree. I agree. And, it just takes getting out of your comfort zone, and trusting yourself, that you're going to do it, and you'll make what it is that you want to make. You'll write what you want to write. You'll put out there what you want to put out there, and you're not going to do it for other people necessarily. You're not going to say like, oh no, I'm going to tell her myself because I need this to be accepted, and then it's got to go here and it's got to go there. It's no, what's burning inside of you? What you need to make happen, and get it down and do it, do it with a lot of conviction, and then just hope that people will have a great response to it, and I think what I've learned from that movie is the same thing that I've taken on this journey with this book. It's sort of like, let's tell the fantastic story. Let's hold no punches. Don't let anybody tell you no. Go out there and write it. Never set out to win festivals and stuff like that. Just hope that people are gonna take to it, and know that there's going to be people that aren't going to take to it, and that's fine too, because I didn't write the book for everybody. I didn't make the movie for everybody. There'll be a percentage of people that will get it and will love it, and to me that's the greatest gift of all.
Would you ever, I agree with that. Would you ever have Rick Price become a movie? Would you produce it or would you want it picked up?
It's funny that you say that. I have an agent that is, constantly on my back about turning this into a screenplay. So as I'm writing my second book, Thank God for the Drugs, I'm also dabbling in the screenplay for Thank God for the Sinners. It was written, with a cinematography lens to it.
Mhm.
As you read the book, you'll feel that it's very much a movie. And that's because of my experience writing screenplays and directing movies. That you kind of see things a certain way and you express them a certain way. You want to take readers to certain places. And so it's written with a lens to film for sure. And I only hope that it gets there one day.
Well, that's exactly because you already had the experience, and maybe you don't have those skills. Maybe they need to be dusted off. I don't know, last time you wrote your screenplay, and obviously the industry has changed a lot. But
Yeah.
it seems like you have so much material with Rick Price. And if it's going to be two, three, four books, I mean, that it easily could be a full movie.
Oh yeah, no, this first book can definitely be a full movie. If anything, I'm having trouble, editing parts out of the book to make it a movie, because, movie scripts are generally, I don't know, something about 70, 80 pages, but, we're writing novels, we're writing, three, 400 pages, so how do you take all that and distill it down and,
Not
cut
lose
some
the
things
point.
out and talk about camera angles and close-up shots and things like that you're not really thinking about. When you write, like we write, you have freedom to do whatever you want at any point, to do it how you want to do it. And screenplays are very much, this is how it's supposed to be written. So
Mhm.
it kind of puts you more into a box. And I think that's why sometimes a lot of people feel that, the movies aren't good as the books,
Yeah.
again, it's, there's a lot, it's a little bit of a different world. Um, but still, trying to distill it down into a screenplay is as creative and as challenging as just about anything else, but a lot of fun to do. I'm not
Oh,
complaining.
100%. That's why we don't like the movies more than the books because they cut out so much. And you're just like,
Yeah,
why isn't this scene in there? And because there's no time.
yeah, and when you write a book, everything's so precious. All my chapters, all my characters, everything. I can't cut anybody out. Those are my,
I have
I
all
gave
of
birth to them.
that.
I gave birth to them.
Oh, that's so true. So I have two questions left.
Okay,
The first, tell everybody one, the name of your book and where they can find it and find you online.
yeah. So the book is Thank God for the Sinners. It could be found on, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, wherever books are sold, any of the .com arenas as well. If you go to my website, ericmagun.com, there's links to buy the book there. You can follow all Rick Price's madness. There's some antidotes on there. There's a lot of reviews, and a lot of different links. You can get the Spotify playlist on that website as well. And as I mentioned before, you can have the links to my film, Toast with the Gods. I'm active on social media, Instagram and Facebook, and all the usual stuff that's happening now today, to get the name out there.
Excellent. My last question to everybody from is if you could wave a wand and in 1 year anything could be true, what would that be?
Well, that this book of mine gets bought by some studio, and we start really seriously working on the film, because I think it's a great series. I think it's a really different character. It's compelling. It's frightening at the same time, but it's different. And I think that today, where everything is so marginalized and things seem so predictable, it's nice to have something fresh and original. And I just hope that other people can see the same thing as I do.
Well, from your lips to the universe's ears, I dearly hope it happens.
Well, thank you.
So when you have book 2 done, you definitely have
Yeah,
to come back and we will have
sure.
our hour-long story time about Rig Price again.
Well, that's great. And I would look forward to doing that. This has been very enjoyable.
Yes, thank you so much. And I am honored to have you on my show. And congratulations again on your debut novel and all the awards.
Great. Well, I appreciate being here, and thanks for everybody for all their accolades. I really appreciate that. And
Thanks,
thank you.
Rick.
Okay.
Now.
Okay. Take care. Cheers, everyone.